Have you ever left a room with your chest tight, replaying words you wish you hadn't spoken? Anger has that power. It rushes in like fire, and before you know it, you've burned bridges you meant to protect. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in others. That moment when the need to be heard turns into a trap, and what was meant as strength becomes surrender. There is a silence that cuts deeper than any argument, a stillness that unsettles those who expect chaos. I once noticed how the person who does not react immediately, who does not defend or explain, suddenly becomes larger in the room. Not weaker, not passive, larger. It is unsettling because it reveals something most of us forget. The one who holds back holds the ground. The Stoics understood this. Machiavelli saw it too. The art of not arguing is not avoidance, it is power. The kind of power that shields you from being owned by your own fury. Stay with me. Let's look closer at why silence, especially when you are angry, might be the sharpest weapon you will ever carry. As we step into the first chapter, picture this. A crowded room where voices clash like clanging metal, each person desperate to be heard, each word heavier than the last. In the middle of this storm, one man does not speak. He does not lift a finger, yet all eyes drift toward him. Why? Because silence has gravity. Stillness has a weight that no argument can carry. We forget this truth when anger rises. We think the one who argues loudest wins. But history whispers a different lesson. The man who bites his tongue holds his crown. Now imagine the tension of an argument building, two people circling each other like fighters in a ring. Each jab of words only hardens the other's pride. Every phrase sharpens the edge of resistance. You can throw all the logic in the world, but reason is no match for ego. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." Anger makes us plead. Calm makes us powerful. The one who insists, "Listen to me," is already losing. The one who says nothing is already feared. Think of Machiavelli, the strategist who understood human nature not as it should be, but as it is. He saw that people do not surrender to argument, they surrender to perception. The ruler who explains himself too much looks small. The general who justifies every move invites doubt. Influence is never about noise, it is about aura. It is about leaving questions unanswered, about standing so firm that others cannot read your next move. A silent man becomes a mirror. The more others shout, the more they reveal themselves, while he remains untouched. Consider a simple example, a heated debate in a meeting. One voice grows sharp, another louder, faces flush with frustration. And then one man leans back. He listens. He does not defend. He does not scramble to prove his worth. He simply watches. By the end, he has spoken fewer words than anyone else, yet the room remembers him. Not for what he said, but for what he refused to say. That refusal left a weight in the air, a reminder that true command does not rise to every challenge. That is real strength. Let's bring it closer. Have you ever tried to convince someone who was already lost in their pride? The more you pressed, the deeper they dug into their fortress. You weren't breaking down their walls, you were fortifying them. Your words became bricks in their defense. That is why arguing almost always fails. Not because you lack evidence, but because ego cannot bow to logic. And when you let yourself be pulled into that mud, you show your weakness. You show you can be baited. You show that their chaos controls your calm. The Stoics understood this with painful clarity. Epictetus said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." Every time you argue in anger, you hand over your leash. You say, "Here, guide me where you want me." The powerful know better. They plant ideas like seeds and let time do the convincing. They lead without explaining. They dominate not by shouting, but by standing unmoved while others waste their breath. In the chessboard of life, silence is the piece no one sees, but everyone fears. It forces your opponent to move blindly, and blind moves are mistakes. I remember once watching a man attacked publicly, accused of incompetence. The crowd leaned in, expecting a rebuttal, expecting fire. Instead, he stayed still. He let the accuser speak. Then, he said nothing at all. Days later, the accuser was forgotten, dismissed as petty. The silent man, he was remembered as dignified. His refusal to argue protected his frame, and that frame became his fortress. He had given away nothing. That day I learned, silence is not retreat. Silence is presence at its most commanding. At this stage, let's strip away the illusion. Arguments are not weapons, they are traps. Every word flung in anger is not a spear, it is a shovel. And you are digging not into their defenses, but into your own grave of pride and regret. The more you swing, the deeper you go. You are not convincing them, you are convincing yourself that you need to be heard. And that need, that hunger to be right, is the clearest sign of weakness. So, here is the paradox. By refusing to argue, you appear stronger. By withholding words, you expand your presence. When you stand calm in the middle of provocation, you send a message far louder than shouting ever could. I cannot be moved. I cannot be baited. My peace is sovereign. And people feel that. They respect it. They fear it. Because the man who cannot be provoked is the man no one can control. Think of your own life. The last time you argued in anger, did you really win? Or did you walk away with your chest tight, wishing you had said less, wishing you had stood taller? Now think of the last time you stayed silent. The room shifted, the other fumbled. The power was yours without you lifting a hand. That is the quiet language of command. That is the advantage you carry when you refuse to step into the battlefield of words. Seneca once wrote, "A man who is angry is not only conquered by his adversary, but by himself." When you argue in anger, you are conquered twice. But when you master your tongue, you master your destiny. Because silence does not expose cracks. It builds unshakable walls. At the end of the day, the man who knows when to speak and when to stay silent is the man who owns himself. And a man who owns himself is untouchable. From here, we move deeper into this hidden art, the discipline that turns silence into strategy and calm into unbreakable influence. Stay with me. The next step will show you why holding your fire can be the sharpest weapon you'll ever wield. Moving into the second chapter, picture this. You step into a conversation already charged with tension. Words hang heavy in the air, waiting for you to grab them, to throw them back. And in that split second, you feel the pull, the bait of an argument. It promises release. It promises vindication. But the moment you take it, you've stepped into someone else's arena. You're no longer standing on your ground. You've walked into their frame, their narrative, their game. Now, imagine this truth. When you argue, you're not just defending an idea. You're showing your hand. You reveal where your patience thins, where your temper rises, where your calm breaks. Even if you win, what have you gained? The other retreats deeper into their pride, and you have already surrendered the most precious thing you had, your mystery. That hidden force that made you untouchable now lies exposed in the mud of their chaos. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. But in argument, calmness dies. You trade strength for noise. You trade power for the illusion of victory." And the irony is this: nobody really seeks truth in an argument. They seek control. They seek to pull you into their storm and measure themselves against your reaction. Every time you answer back, you've already given them what they wanted. Here's where Machiavelli and the Stoics before him shared a brutal clarity. Power does not live in the last word. Power lives in not needing any word at all. Think of it. The man who speaks little but observes much carries an advantage that cannot be seized. No one knows where he stands. No one knows how far his patience stretches. No one knows what he will do next. And that uncertainty is terrifying. Silence makes you a question no one can answer. A fortress with no door. Let me give you a story. I once sat in a room where a colleague was publicly challenged. The challenger grew louder, throwing arguments like stones, desperate to provoke. Everyone expected the colleague to fight back, to defend, to explain, but he didn't. He simply looked, calm and still, and let the noise fall flat. Minutes passed. The challenger exhausted himself, and the silence grew heavier than any rebuttal could. When the meeting ended, it was clear who had won. Not the one with more words, but the one who never stepped into the trap. He had turned his quiet into armor. That is the hidden cost of arguing. You may think you are defending yourself, but you're really defending their bait. And in doing so, you expose what should remain unseen. Silence, however, works like a mirror. It forces the other person to wrestle with their own words, their own pride, their own emptiness. And in that space, they often crumble, because silence does what arguments cannot. It leaves them alone with themselves. Seneca warned us, "He who angers you conquers you." Every time you leap into an argument, you announce your boundaries. You show exactly where you can be moved. But the one who refuses to argue, he is unreadable, he is untouchable. He becomes a wall others break themselves against. That kind of restraint is not weakness. It is the highest form of command. So let me cut it clear. Arguments feed the ego. They feed pride, vanity, the endless hunger to be right. But silence builds power. It builds presence. It builds an aura so strong that others bend without knowing why. The man who doesn't argue is not defeated. He is not exposed. He is not weakened. He simply remains unshaken, unmoved, unprovoked. And others waste their strength swinging at shadows. At the end of the day, you must choose. Do you want the fleeting high of being right? Or do you want the lasting power of being untouchable? Because the battlefield of words is endless. But the one who steps out of it walks away the true victor. And from here, we step into the next truth, why silence is not only protection, but the sharpest shield you will ever carry. Advancing to the third chapter, picture this: a ruler on a balcony, smiling to the crowd, his face calm, his gestures measured. Everyone sees mercy, faith, strength. Yet behind that mask is calculation, a man who knows that words can betray faster than swords. Niccolo Machiavelli once advised leaders to appear noble, yet always be ready to act otherwise. Why? Because appearance itself is a weapon. And the moment you argue, you drop the mask. You show emotion. You show insecurity. You hand your enemy a map to your weak points. Now imagine a courtroom, or a negotiation table, or even a family dinner. One person raises their voice, explaining, justifying, defending. With every sentence, they open another crack in their armor. The other remains still, silent, unmoved. Which one looks stronger? Which one feels safer to follow? Silence protects power because it cannot be twisted. Words can be reinterpreted, replayed, sharpened into knives. But silence is untouchable. There is nothing to grab, nothing to turn against you. It is the one shield that leaves no opening. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Arguments trap us into sameness, shouting against shouting, anger against anger. But silence lifts us above the mud. It says, "I will not meet you there. I will not fight on your terms." It is discipline disguised as distance, and that distance protects everything you carry inside. Think of leadership. A manager who argues with his team loses authority. An executive who defends every decision invites doubt. But the leader who listens more than he speaks, who acts without broadcasting, who decides without explaining, that leader becomes unshakable. People trust him not because of eloquence, but because of presence. Presence is the currency of power, and presence grows when words are few. Here's where history speaks loudest. The greatest diplomats, the generals who bent the course of wars, the negotiators who shaped peace treaties, they did not waste their fire on arguments. They maneuvered, they waited, they let others burn their energy on explanation, on justification, on reaction. And when they finally spoke, it was with precision, not with passion. Precision is remembered. Passion fades. The Stoics knew this. Machiavelli only gave it sharper edges. Let me tell you a story. A young lawyer once faced an older, more experienced opponent in court. The older man roared, argued, gestured wildly, filling the air with sound. The younger man said almost nothing. He asked 2 questions. Then he sat down. At the end of the day, the jury remembered only the silence between those questions, the weight of what was not said. He won, not because of words, but because of restraint. He left no trail for attack. His silence was his armor. This is what most people forget. Arguments may win logic, but they leave behind wounds. The one who loses an argument rarely forgets how you made them feel. They may concede today, but resentment festers. It grows in the dark, and one day it returns as rebellion. Silence leaves no scar. Silence denies resentment a foothold. That is why silence is not emptiness. It is protection. It is strategy. It is discipline wrapped in calm. At this stage, remember, your silence is not passive. It is active. It shapes the field without entering the fight. It bends outcomes without showing your hand. It holds the highest ground without needing to climb. Those who argue think they are winning territory. Those who stay silent already own it. Because silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of power. And so, as we move forward, we must ask, if silence protects power, how can it outsmart the chaos that anger brings? That is where the path now leads. Entering the 4th chapter, picture this: a storm of voices clashing, every word sharper than the last, every tone heavier with urgency. In the center, one man does not raise his voice. He does not defend. He does not argue. He simply waits, calm as a stone in a raging river. And while the storm thinks it is winning, it is already exhausting itself. This is the secret Machiavelli and the Stoics both understood. Silence outsmarts chaos. Now imagine the moment you feel anger rising in your chest, and someone pushes you to speak, to fight, to prove. Your pulse quickens. Your mouth wants to open. But what happens if you don't? What if you simply let the silence grow? What if you resist the need to say, "Please, see it my way"? Because that's what argument is. Pleading. A confession that without someone else's agreement, your truth is not enough. But if your truth is real, why must it be shouted from rooftops? Why must it beg for applause? Marcus Aurelius gave us a line that cuts through centuries. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. His wisdom is simple. Act. Don't explain. Don't defend. Just embody. Machiavelli, ruthless and cold, agreed from a different angle. He saw that if your position is strong, you don't argue, you demonstrate. You don't defend, you deliver. Real power needs no validation. It stands like a mountain, silent, immovable, indifferent to the winds that scream around it. Here's where most fail. They confuse noise with strength. They rush to argue because they fear that without explanation they will be dismissed. But this rush betrays them. It reveals insecurity. It shows a mind that anchors its worth in shifting opinions. And opinions shift like sand. The man who argues is the man who begs for ground. The man who stays still already owns it. Think about the people you respect most. Is it the one who speaks in every meeting, defending every decision, explaining every move? Or is it the one who speaks rarely, but when they do, the room stops breathing? Approval is fleeting currency. It spends fast and buys little. Influence flows not from being understood, but from being unprovoked. The composed man is not feared because he is aggressive. He is feared because he is immune. You cannot bait him. You cannot drag him into foolish exposure. He does not try to win the room. He becomes the room. Let me tell you about a friend who learned this the hard way. He worked in a company where meetings often turned into contests of ego. One day, his boss attacked his project in front of everyone. My friend felt the fire rise, and he fought back with every argument he had. He left that room shaking with adrenaline, convinced he had defended himself well. But what lingered in the eyes of others was not his logic. It was his loss of control. Months later, another colleague faced the same kind of attack. This time he smiled slightly, made one short note, and stayed quiet. The boss lost steam. The room saw who looked stronger. Not the one who fought hardest, but the one who didn't need to fight at all. Silence won that day. Machiavelli's brilliance was not that he invented human nature, but that he stripped it bare. He showed that persuasion is for the powerless. Influence belongs to the strategic. And the moment you argue, you abandon command. You step into another's arena, under their rules, moving to their rhythm. But silence keeps you above the chaos. Silence lets them dance while you conserve your force for the moment that matters. Because in the game of power, restraint is leverage, and leverage moves mountains. In modern life, you see this everywhere. In business, the man who argues endlessly in meetings or fires off emotional emails shows his attachment to outcomes. He bleeds leverage in front of everyone, but the one who listens carefully, who nods strategically, who speaks only once and shifts the entire room, that man commands silent respect. He is remembered not for noise, but for precision, and precision carries weight. In relationships, the trap is even more subtle. An argument can turn affection into rivalry, love into contested territory. Every word becomes a bullet, every silence a minefield. But the one who refuses to argue, who steps back, recalibrates, and lets consistent action speak, wins not through domination, but through mastery of self. Stoicism teaches that control is never about overpowering others. It is about mastering yourself so deeply that no storm can drag you in. Real love, real leadership, real presence. They are not proven by argument. They are proven by stillness. Look at public life. On social media, Those who argue with every insult, who defend every slight, become predictable. They shrink. They are seen as reactors, not as authorities. But the one who withholds, who lets critics shout into the void, who lets time, truth, and results be his defense, he becomes untouchable. He cultivates mystery, and mystery is the rarest form of power. Robert Greene reminds us mystique is not an accident. It is a weapon, and silence is its sharpest edge. Here's where you must see the deeper pattern. When someone tries to argue with you, they are not simply debating ideas. They are baiting you into quicksand, emotional quicksand. The second you step in, you sink. They set the tone, they set the tempo, they choose the terrain. And you lose clarity. But if you stay still, if you watch with calm, if you let their need to be right reveal their weakness, you win without moving. It is the art of winning by refusing to play. Machiavelli did not waste energy on fairness. He wasted none on appearances of virtue. He cared about results. And in the realm of results, arguments are ruinous. They escalate small sparks into long wars. They harden opposition rather than softening it. They create enemies out of neutrals. Worst of all, they open the window to your emotional landscape, giving others a map to your reactions. Once someone knows your buttons, they own you. And that is a price no man of strength can afford. So what should you do instead? You observe. You listen. You absorb everything but reveal nothing. You measure the terrain with patience, and when the time is right, you act. Not with an explanation, not with argument, with finality, clean, silent, precise, like a blade in the dark. Others fill the air with noise. Let them. Others exhaust themselves with their desperate need to be seen, to be right. Let them. You, meanwhile, remain still, centered, watching, and when you finally speak, when you finally choose to move, your words do not scatter like arrows. They fall like a hammer, precise, final, undeniable, not to debate, not to convince, but to end the matter before it even begins. That is the ultimate Machiavellian move. That is the Stoics' discipline, to refuse to argue, to speak only when it matters, to let silence roar louder than anger ever could. Because silence cannot be twisted, it cannot be used against you, it cannot be defeated, it floats above the noise, untouched, unbroken. At this stage you must understand, the greatest weapon you hold is not your argument, it is your indifference. Indifference to bait, indifference to noise, indifference to the desperate need of others to be validated by your reaction. Within that indifference lies a freedom no force of words can conquer. Within that indifference lies the power that outsmarts chaos itself. And from here, we move into the closing lesson. Why refusing to argue does not only protect you, but commands respect so deep that it bends the room around your silence. At this stage, let's pull the curtain back. You stand in a world that screams, a world where everyone demands to be heard, to be right, to be seen. Noise has become the new currency. But here is the paradox. The quieter you are, the louder your presence becomes. Silence does not just prevent conflict, it creates a gravity of its own. It bends the room, it pulls people inward. It makes them lean closer without you ever having to raise your voice. That is the hidden strength of refusing to argue. Now, imagine a room where someone challenges you publicly. All eyes swing toward you, waiting for a reaction, hungry for spectacle. If you rise to the bait and argue, you feed the fire, you validate the show. But if you pause, if you stay calm, if you redirect the energy back to outcomes rather than emotions, The tension dissolves before it even takes shape. You didn't defend, you didn't perform, you produced. And in that calm refusal, something shifts. People begin to respect you, not for what you argue, but for what you won't explain. That is authority without noise. Machiavelli saw it clearly. He said silence isn't absence, it's tension, it's weight. It unsettles because it cannot be read. Arguments push people away, silence draws them in. Arguments scatter your energy, silence gathers it. When you argue, you hand over your advantage. When you refuse, you turn silence into an invisible weapon. A weapon that doesn't strike, but bends the room toward you. Think of the storm inside a relationship. One partner lashes out, baiting the other into a shouting match. If you meet fire with fire, you lose twice. You lose your peace and you lose your frame. But if you remain calm, if you let silence hold its ground, the storm runs out of itself. You win not by dominating the other, but by mastering yourself. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is a slave to his passions." And anger, when it drags you into argument, makes you a slave. But silence keeps you sovereign. Consider the public coliseum of today, social media. It thrives on instant arguments, on quick retorts, on endless defense. But the truth is brutal. The moment you start defending yourself against petty critics, you've already lost standing, because those who must explain themselves fall in the eyes of the crowd. Machiavelli would remind us, explanation is weakness dressed as logic. Silence, however, becomes filtration. It separates what deserves your energy from what doesn't. It turns provocation into static, and static cannot touch you. But why is silence so hard? Because the ego whispers. It tells you to prove yourself, to be right, to be the last voice in the room. And when you obey, you step into fights that diminish you, arguments that do not lift you, but lower you. The Stoic mind does not feed this impulse. It does not chase validation. Instead, it watches. It lets others expose their impatience, their insecurities, their hunger to be affirmed, and in that watching, you gain what they lose: information. Every argument you avoid gives you priceless insight into the other. Their words betray their blind spots. Their emotions betray their fears. And you remain unreadable. And the unreadable man is the most dangerous man in any room. Here is the paradox. The one who refuses to argue often becomes the most persuasive. Why? Because silence cannot be refuted. Silence cannot be twisted. A man who doesn't argue isn't weak. He's calculating. He's choosing. And when he finally speaks, his words are few, but heavy, not scattered like dust, but dropped like stone. Precision over volume. His silence isn't retreat. It's artillery held in reserve, waiting for the moment that matters most. Machiavelli also knew the darker truth. When you argue, you are training your opponent how to manipulate you. Every defense you make, every crack of emotion you show, tells them what you value, what you fear, what provokes you, and in their hands, that map becomes a weapon. But if you remain calm, if you cannot be baited, you deny them their advantage. You become unreadable. And an unreadable man cannot be controlled. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you speak only with purpose. Words become tools, not habits. The Machiavellian mind is not reactive, it is selective. And through that selectivity, respect is not demanded, it is felt, it is breathed in the silence between your sentences. Look at real life. In personal conflicts, when people fling accusations, expecting you to flail with them, your calmness becomes their frustration. In debates, when voices rise and attacks fly, you answer not with defense, but with clarity or with silence. You control the entire room. In leadership, when panic spreads in crisis, the one who does not over-explain but moves decisively without noise becomes the pillar everyone leans on. This is not theory. This is the architecture of real influence. Even in war, this principle stands. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win without argument, to outlast chaos, not by matching it, but by transcending it." This is the Stoics' war. This is Machiavellian warfare at its finest. Psychological dominance without the waste of emotional energy. So how does this translate into your life today? When challenged, pause, breathe. Let the tension rise without rushing to cut it down. If you must respond, use short, composed lines. You're entitled to your view. Or say nothing at all. Let them wonder. Let them drown in their own noise. In digital spaces, do not pour energy into every critic, every stranger, every bite of provocation. Silence is not surrender. It is filtration. It keeps you focused on mission while others lose themselves in distraction. In relationships, resist the urge to match outbursts with outbursts. Resist the urge to explain yourself when accused unfairly. Instead, slow the rhythm. Create space. Speak when needed, but never from emotion. Always from command. In business, don't defend. Deliver. Let your results be the sharpest argument. Let execution, not explanation, speak for you. Because here is the final truth. You don't need to win arguments when you've already won yourself. When your confidence is rooted within, not hanging on the strings of applause. When your peace is anchored inside, not exposed to the winds of others. When your value is carved so deep within you that no insult can scratch it. That man, the one who doesn't flinch when provoked, who doesn't chase applause, who doesn't argue to be seen, that man does not demand respect. His stillness commands it. At the end of the day, the greatest displays of power are never found in shouting matches. They are found in the man who sits quietly, unshaken, unprovoked, untouched. While the world screams around him, he remains the center. And in that stillness lies the respect that cannot be taken, only given, and it is given freely to the one who refuses to argue. From here, we turn a corner. Part A has revealed why arguing in anger is always a losing game, how it exposes your weakness, feeds your ego, and drains the very strength you meant to protect. But knowing what not to do is only half the battle. The greater challenge is this. What should you do instead? How do you hold yourself steady when anger rises? And how do you turn that restraint into lasting power? Part B is where silence becomes strategy, where discipline transforms into practice. This is not just about avoiding mistakes. It is about building a new way of standing in the storm, one that protects your peace and extends your influence. As we step into the first chapter, picture this. The moment anger first stirs in your chest, your breathing quickens, your hands tremble, and the urge to respond feels almost impossible to resist. It is as if chaos itself has gripped your throat and dares you to fight back. Yet, here is where the true battle begins, not against another person, but against yourself. Because if you can master this first surge, if you can hold steady while the storm rages inside, you have already won more than half the war. Now, imagine this scene. A heated conversation at work. Someone insults your effort in front of everyone. You feel the fire ignite, your mind scrambling for the perfect comeback. But instead of releasing that fire, you breathe. You let it burn without moving. What happens? The one who insulted you leans forward, waiting for a reaction that never comes. They stumble over their own words, exposed. The room shifts, and without you speaking, the weight tilts in your favor. This is the cold pause, a discipline few can hold, yet the very discipline that separates the strong from the ordinary. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoics saw anger not as a force to unleash, but as a signal to master. And Machiavelli, centuries later, reframed it as strategy. The man who controls his pause controls the battlefield. The pause is not empty. It is loaded with unseen force. It says, "I am not yours to provoke." It transforms you from a participant in chaos to the commander of silence. Here's where it turns practical. The pause is a protocol. First, you name what you feel, not out loud, but inwardly. This is anger. Second, you break the immediacy. Change the scene, adjust your posture, shift your breathing. Third, you set time between stimulus and response. A single minute in conversation, an hour in conflict, a day in crisis. And finally, you choose, not from the fire of the moment, but from the clarity of distance. What was once a reflex becomes a decision, and decisions, unlike reflexes, are remembered with respect. Think of the generals who shaped history. They did not charge at every provocation. They waited. They measured. They allowed others to exhaust their rage while they gathered clarity. Then they struck, not in haste, but in precision. Your life is no different. The pause is your battlefield strategy. Without it, you are a pawn. With it, you are a player who moves only when the board is yours to command. A story. I knew a man who, in a heated negotiation, was accused of dishonesty. The room grew tense. Everyone expected him to fight back immediately. But he didn't. He sat still, hands folded, eyes calm. The silence stretched until the accuser fumbled, overplayed, and revealed too much. Then, with a single quiet sentence, the man dismantled the attack and redirected the discussion. That silence, that pause, one more than any flood of words could have. It wasn't avoidance, it was mastery. Seneca once wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay. Delay cools the fire, clears the fog, and returns you to yourself." Anger wants immediacy. Wisdom demands space. Every pause is an act of reclaiming your own sovereignty. Every pause denies others control over your emotions, and in denying them control, you reclaim the throne within. Here is the paradox. People expect you to react. They rely on your outburst to confirm their power. But when you refuse, when you pause instead, you hand them nothing. They punch into air. They wrestle shadows. And all the while, you remain intact. The cold pause is not weakness. It is silent dominance. It says, "I choose the time. I choose the terms." So what does this create in you? Respect. Not the kind you demand, but the kind others cannot help but give. They may not like you. They may not agree with you, but they will respect you. Because they will know you cannot be baited. And the one who cannot be baited is the one who cannot be beaten. At this stage, remember this truth. You do not control the storm outside, but you can control the space between the strike and your response. That space is where your strength is forged. That pause is your shield, and in time, it becomes your weapon. From here, we move toward the next lesson. Why denying yourself the rush of immediate reaction is not just about holding anger back, but about protecting the most precious asset you have, your time. Moving into the second chapter, picture this. The aftermath of a storm. The sky is heavy, the air thick, and though the rain has stopped, the ground is still trembling. This is what happens inside us when anger fades, but decisions remain. In that fragile space, the danger is not the emotion itself, but the promises made under its weight. Anger whispers quick vows, rash commitments, threats disguised as strength. And when the fire cools, you're left with words you wish you could take back, actions you wish you had never chosen. Now imagine this scenario. A heated argument with a colleague ends with you declaring, "I'll never work with you again." Hours later, the rage is gone, but the consequence remains. You've drawn a line in the sand that cannot be erased without losing face. Or picture a parent shouting to a child, "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Words flung in anger that echo for years. This is the hidden cost of reacting too soon. You trap yourself in the shadow of your own fire. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca warned, "An angry man opens his mouth and shuts his eyes." What he meant is simple. Anger blinds us first, then makes us speak. And what we speak binds us. But wisdom teaches delay. Delay cools the blood. Delay saves you from the slavery of your own outburst. In modern terms, this is the discipline of the 24-hour rule. Do not make commitments or pronouncements when the heat still lingers, because no matter how right they feel in the moment, they will not age well in the calm. Let me share a story. A friend of mine once nearly quit his job in a burst of anger. His manager embarrassed him publicly and he stormed into HR, ready to resign on the spot. A mentor intervened, telling him simply, "Wait a day." Reluctantly, he held his decision. The next morning, with clearer eyes, he saw things differently. He still confronted the disrespect, but with composure, not fire. Instead of throwing away years of work in an instant, he gained leverage. He negotiated a transfer to a stronger role, something anger alone would never have achieved. That one day of pause changed the course of his career. This is what discipline looks like in practice. The 24-hour rule is not avoidance, it is wisdom in action. It says, "I will not hand my future to the weakest version of myself." It allows you to place time between emotion and execution. And in that time, clarity returns. Rage transforms into perspective. What seemed urgent becomes trivial. What seemed unforgivable softens into solvable. But here's the paradox. The ego resists this discipline. The ego says, act now, speak now, prove now. It craves immediacy. It fears being dismissed if it waits. Yet those who give in to immediacy are always trapped by it. Their lives are littered with apologies, corrections, backpedaling. But those who can wait, those who hold, they become untouchable. Their words carry weight precisely because they are not rushed. Their decisions hold because they were chosen, not flung. Consider Marcus Aurelius writing in the dead of night to remind himself, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." These words only work if you allow yourself the time to test them. Time is the forge. Time reveals whether your impulse was truth or just heat. And in giving yourself that space, you gain something rarer than victory. You gain control of your own reputation. Think about it in your own life. How many conflicts could have been smaller if you had simply waited one more day before responding? How many scars could have been avoided if you had let silence be the first reply? The 24-hour rule is not weakness. It is shield and sword. Shield because it protects you from your own fire. Sword because it gives your eventual words the sharpness of intention. A modern example. In the digital age, the temptation to fire back instantly is constant. An email that angers you, a comment online that insults you, the reply forms on your tongue, on your keyboard. But the one who hits send too quickly always pays. Screenshots live forever. Rash words become permanent ink. But the one who waits, who writes, then sets it aside, then revisits with clear eyes, that person gains more than restraint. They gain respect, because their words are not heat, they are steel. At this stage, let us be clear. Discipline is not in silence alone. Discipline is in choosing the right moment to speak and refusing to be rushed into mistakes. The 24-hour rule is not about shrinking from conflict. It is about mastering its timing, and in mastering timing, you master outcomes. So here is the lesson. Never let anger sign the contracts of your life. Never let fury decide the terms of your future. Time is your ally. Delay is your shield. Wait, and you will see clearly what anger tried to hide. Act only when your vision is steady and your path will not collapse beneath you. From here, we move toward the next truth, how the fire of anger itself can be transformed, not suppressed, into a source of power that builds rather than destroys. Advancing to the third chapter, picture this. You're standing before a mirror, but the reflection staring back at you is not your face, it is your anger. Every flare of temper, every word you regret, every reaction you wish you could take back is etched into that glass. Anger, when it comes, is not just a storm in the room. It is a mirror of the self. And the question is never only, why did they do this? It is, what does my reaction say about me? Now imagine someone cutting you off in traffic. The horn rises in your throat before you can even think. You slam your hand on the wheel, your pulse climbs, and for a few moments you are not in control, the stranger is. But here is the truth the Stoics insisted upon. No one makes you angry. They only reveal the anger that was already waiting in you. Seneca warned, most of what we call anger is really our inability to endure the truth about ourselves. In other words, the world presses, but the crack was already there. Here's where power lies. If anger is a mirror, then every flare is a lesson. What offends you most exposes what you still have not mastered. You can rage at others, but the wiser path is to ask, why did this touch me so deeply? Why this and not something else? When you learn to ask, the mirror becomes a teacher instead of a tormentor. Each spark of anger shows you where the work must be done. I recall a friend who always lost his calm when people interrupted him. In meetings, at dinners, even in casual conversation, he would flare up at the slightest cut-off. For years, he blamed others for being rude. But when he finally sat with it, he realized the truth. His anger was not about interruptions. It was about a deeper wound, a fear of being overlooked, of being unseen. The moment he recognized this, he gained power. Not power over others, but power over himself. His silence in those moments became his weapon, not his weakness. Epictetus taught, when someone provokes you, remember, it is your judgment that provokes you, not the words, not the act, your judgment, your story about what that act means. And stories can be rewritten. If someone mocks you, do you take it as an attack or as a reflection of their own insecurity? If someone ignores you, do you see it as disrespect or as proof of their distraction, not your worth? The mirror is not fixed. You choose how you interpret what you see. This is where transformation begins. Anger is raw energy. Left untamed, it destroys. Redirected, it builds. The fire that once fueled outbursts can fuel growth if you have the courage to face the mirror instead of smashing it. The workout done with clenched teeth. The late-night project finished when fury could have been wasted online. The self-discipline strengthened by every restraint. Anger can be turned into motion, into creation, into mastery, but only if you hold it in your hands long enough to reshape it. Marcus Aurelius asked himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That sentence is not a mantra, it is a mirror. Every time the world tests you, every time anger stirs, you are being shown the gap between your ideals and your reality. Do you close that gap with reaction, or do you narrow it with restraint? Each choice is a stroke on the canvas of your character. Let me share another story. A man I once worked with had a rival who constantly undermined him in subtle ways. For months, he reacted, snapping back, defending, pointing fingers. It drained him, consumed him, until one day he shifted. He stopped responding to the rival entirely. Every attack became a mirror. Instead of arguing, he asked himself, "What is this teaching me about my need to be seen, about my craving for approval?" Within weeks, he grew calmer, sharper, more focused. His rival lost power, not because the attack stopped, but because they no longer had a handle to grab. Silence turned the game upside down. This is the paradox. Anger feels like power, but it is slavery. Reflection feels like weakness, but it is freedom. When you treat anger as a mirror, you stop blaming the world for your storms. You start using the storms to chart your own map, and slowly, the very things that once controlled you become the tools that refine you. At this stage, remember this: life will always press your buttons, but the one who controls the response controls the board. The one who studies the mirror grows stronger each time it shatters, and the one who turns fury into fuel builds a fortress within that no provocation can breach. From here, we move toward the next lesson: how detachment, the art of stepping back, can open the door to a freedom that anger will never allow. From here, we step into the fourth chapter, the art of detachment. Picture yourself standing on a shoreline, waves crashing loud and furious, but you do not step into the water, you simply watch. The tide rages, but your feet remain dry. This is the freedom the Stoics spoke of. Not to silence the storm outside, but to master the choice of whether or not to enter it. Now imagine a heated room, voices rising, fingers pointing, tempers spiraling. You feel the pull, the invitation to dive into the fight. But what if you didn't? What if you simply leaned back, breathed slowly, and let their words pass over you like wind across a mountain? Detachment is not indifference, it is mastery. It is the refusal to let another person's storm dictate your weather. Seneca said it with piercing clarity: "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The chaos around us is rarely as dangerous as the chaos we allow inside." Here's where the strategy lies. Detachment is not escape. It is command. To detach is to step out of the frame someone else sets for you. When they bait you with insult, they want your anger. When they press you with pressure, they want your panic. But if you stay calm, if you remain rooted, you rob them of the one thing they seek most: control over you. The battlefield shrinks beneath your stillness. Their weapons turn blunt when you no longer provide a target. I recall a story of a man in business who faced a brutal competitor. This rival tried every tactic: public criticism, personal attacks, emotional traps in meetings. Each time the man simply acknowledged with a slight nod and shifted back to outcomes. He never defended himself, never joined the noise. Over time, the rival's voice grew shrill, desperate, hollow. The man who detached, who refused to argue, was the one others began to trust. Because detachment creates clarity, and clarity commands loyalty. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. That is detachment in its purest form. Harm exists not in the act, but in our agreement with it. If you refuse to give your consent, the wound never pierces. This is why detachment is freedom. It is the quiet act of saying, "I decide what touches me," and that choice no one can take away. Think of relationships. Arguments can twist love into battlefields. Every silence becomes loaded. Every word becomes ammunition. Yet when one partner practices detachment, not coldness, but composure, the storm loses force. Instead of shouting back, they pause. Instead of proving, they live. And slowly, love returns to ground. No longer a war of pride, but a practice of patience. Detachment saves what argument destroys. Consider also the stage of public life. Social media thrives on reaction. Every insult is bait. Every attack is a hook. The detached do not bite. They let noise be noise. They let critics exhaust themselves against silence. Over time, their absence from chaos becomes presence. Their refusal to fight becomes power. Detachment makes you untouchable, not because you run from the world, but because you refuse to be owned by it. Here's the paradox. Most think detachment means weakness, a lack of care, a step back from life. The opposite is true. Detachment is strength. It is the ability to walk into any storm and remain your own master, to care without being consumed, to stand in fire and not be burned. This is why Epictetus told his students, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger." Detachment turns the eye inward, away from blame, toward mastery. At this stage, let's be blunt. Detachment is discipline. It is not given, it is trained. You build it each time you resist the urge to prove yourself. You strengthen it each time you hold silence instead of spilling fury. You sharpen it each time you choose action over reaction. In time, you become a fortress no chaos can breach. So the lesson is clear. Never let the storms of others become the storms within you. Stay rooted, stay calm, step out of the frame they set, and you will see how quickly the battle collapses without you. That is the gift of detachment. It does not weaken your presence, it enlarges it. And from here, we move toward the final chapter of Part B, where silence and restraint evolve into something greater, a legacy of respect that follows you long after the storm has passed. Entering the 5th chapter, picture this. The echoes of a battle long finished. The shouting has faded, the storm has passed, and the crowd has gone quiet. Yet in the silence, something lingers. The way you carried yourself, the restraint you held, the calm that could not be shaken. This is how respect is born, not in the fire of argument, but in the stillness that follows. Respect is not taken by force. It is drawn, like iron to a magnet, by the presence of someone who needs nothing from others to stand tall. Now, imagine walking into a room where everyone expects you to defend yourself. They prepare their questions, their challenges, their provocations. They want the show. They crave the spectacle of your reaction. And yet when the moment comes, you do not rise to meet it. You sit steady. You answer only what matters. You redirect to the work, to the truth, to what is solid. The tension collapses. The fire dies in their hands. Because while they were ready for a fight, they were not ready for composure. and composure always wins. Machiavelli said silence is not absence, it is gravity. And in that gravity, people lean closer. They wonder what you know that they do not. They question why their provocations do not stir you. The mystery itself commands them. Seneca sharpened it further. He who does not prevent crime when he can, encourages it. Replace crime with argument, and the lesson is clear. To step into every quarrel is to feed it. To refuse is to starve it. And in starving the noise, you grow larger while it withers away. Think of personal conflict. Someone hurls an accusation at you, desperate to drag you into the mud. If you argue, you dignify it. If you explain, you legitimize it. But if you remain calm, if you say only you're entitled to your view or nothing at all, you shift the burden back to them. They are left standing in the mud alone. And the crowd, whether in a meeting, a family gathering, or even a digital space, begins to see clearly who holds the higher ground. Let me share a story. A leader I once knew faced a public crisis. His decisions were questioned, his name dragged through criticism. His advisors urged him to defend himself, to release long statements, to fight back at every corner. He refused. He simply said, "Our work will prove us." And then he went silent, focusing on the mission. Weeks passed, results came. And when the dust cleared, his silence was remembered as strength, not weakness. Because silence, when anchored in conviction, speaks louder than the loudest defense. Here's the paradox. The man who refuses to argue often ends up with the greatest persuasive power. Why? Because silence cannot be refuted. It leaves no cracks. It creates no hooks for others to pull. It is not surrender, it is strategy. A silence that watches, calculates, and speaks only when words fall like a hammer, not like scattered dust. This is why the unreadable man is the most respected, because respect is drawn to what it cannot easily grasp. Consider relationships. Anger turns love into combat. Every word becomes ammunition. Every silence becomes loaded with suspicion. But true strength in intimacy is not to match outbursts, but to slow everything down. To refuse to explain yourself in the heat of attack. To let time and action speak instead. Respect between two people is never built in shouting. It is built in the quiet after the storm, when one realizes the other did not lose themselves in fury. That restraint is love in its highest form. Even in the Colosseum of modern life, social media, the lesson repeats. To argue with critics is to bleed status. To explain endlessly is to trade authority for attention. Machiavelli would remind us, those who must explain themselves have already fallen in the eyes of the crowd. Silence here is filtration. It separates what is worth your energy from what is not. It says to the world, my attention is not for sale. And people feel it. They may not like it, but they respect it. But let's be honest, silence is hard. The ego screams in our ear, say something. Prove yourself, show them you are right. And when we obey, we are dragged into battles beneath us. The Stoic mind does not feed ego. It studies ego. It uses the ego of others as fuel while starving its own. In silence, you learn more about them than they ever learn about you. Every word they speak reveals their weakness. Every outburst exposes their blind spots. And you? You remain untouched, unreadable, untouchable. A friend once told me he practiced silence like a weapon. In debates, he listened. In insults, he observed. In provocation, he waited. And people grew uneasy around him, not because he threatened them, but because they could not predict him. He said, "The less I argued, the more they revealed. The less I explained, the more they wondered. That wonder is respect. It cannot be demanded. It can only be drawn out by mystery." At this stage, the truth becomes clear. You don't need to win arguments when you have already won yourself. Respect comes not from proving, but from embodying, not from defending, but from demonstrating. Marcus Aurelius asked, "What is to be prized?" An untroubled mind. And that is exactly what refusing to argue gives you. A mind untangled from the need for validation, a heart unshaken by insult, a presence unprovoked by noise. Think of how this unfolds in crisis leadership. When the room panics, the leader who argues loses confidence. The leader who explains loses clarity. But the one who remains calm, silent, and decisive becomes the pillar. In that moment, respect is not granted by title, it is earned by composure. And composure is nothing but silence in action. Sun Tzu captured this truth centuries before Machiavelli or Marcus Aurelius. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win without raising your voice, to command respect without demanding it, to let your silence crush the chaos before it can even rise. This is more than philosophy. This is warfare of the highest order, psychological dominance without a drop of wasted blood. So what do you do in daily life? You pause, you breathe, you let tension rise without rushing to cut it down. You choose silence when noise would only weaken you. You use short, calm sentences when pressed, or no words at all. In digital spaces, you do not engage unless it serves your long vision. In relationships, you let love, not ego, hold the line. In work, you let results, not defenses, define your worth. Because here is the final truth. Respect is never taken by force. It flows naturally to the one who stands calm when others lose themselves. It flows to the man who cannot be provoked, who does not chase applause, who does not argue to be seen. That man has no need to ask for respect. His very presence commands it. At the end of the day, the most powerful man in any room is not the one who wins every argument, but the one who does not need to argue at all. He stands calm. He stands untouchable. He stands sovereign. And in his silence, the world bends closer, not out of fear, but out of respect. The one who chooses silence in the face of anger wins battles unseen. He does not chase noise or applause, but carries himself with a calm that bends the room without force. True strength is not in argument, but in the quiet certainty that cannot be shaken. If you found value here, subscribe and keep walking this path of mastery with me. In the comments, write "Stay silent" as a reminder of the strength you already hold. Remain steady, remain clear, and step forward with courage. The journey ahead will only deepen.